Welcome to episode 7 of Living in Recovery, a podcast devoted to sharing the stories of fellow CBP employees who are living in recovery with an addiction. The focus of this podcast is to share the experiences of those who have struggled with alcohol or drugs in the hopes of breaking the stigma that's often associated with addiction. Also, the goal of this podcast is to stimulate hope amongst those who may be struggling but are discouraged or intimidated by the prospect of seeking help. As a disclaimer, the words expressed in this podcast are based on personal experiences alone and are not meant to be taken as medical advice or to promote one method of treatment. Today, Mark shares his recovery experience and how treatment helped him come to terms with his addiction. Now Mark discusses what works for him in his approach to recovery. And Mark, I know I just said treatment, but from what I understand, there wasn't treatment the way we might perceive treatment, or was there? How did that come about?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you for having me. And when I was asked to share my story, it could not only help someone else, but could be a good part of my process, right? Treatment for me, a piece of it, it's not a standard like an inpatient facility where I went away and spent some time doing all this work. I was able to just recognize that alcohol was interfering negatively impacting my life. So I took a series of steps on my own, and it started with a conversation with myself, a very honest one. And one part of this recovery process for me is sharing my story. It's empowering to hear my own words and to just share without judgment. And I've found a lot of support in that. So when I recognized that alcohol was becoming more important to me, I just sort of ignored it. I didn't really want to address it. I didn't fully understand why. After alcohol just being sort of a normal social kind of thing in my life for in my 20s and in my 30s and then into my 40s, I'd have a glass of wine every now and then. I'd have a couple of beers, no big deal. And once it really started showing up in a different way, and I became aware of that, I tried to ignore it. I just wasn't ready to sort of have an honest look in the mirror and get curious about what was going on and why. So I went from basically, I don't know what normal means, but somewhat typical, the occasional drink here and there, usually a social thing, to where I was feeling some shame around my drinking, hiding my drinking, and recognizing all this and really being unwilling to do anything about it. That's when I realized I had a problem.
When the hiding the drinking started, was that the only sign you had, or were there others that there might be a problem?
Well, I think everyone's experiences in relationship with alcohol is different, right? And I do believe that the behavior, when it shifts in a direction that isn't healthy and really isn't sustainable and is detrimental, there's that emotional component behind what's driving this behavior. You're really making a choice and you're shifting and you may not be aware of it. For me, it was a gradual process, right? I was married for 19 years and I divorced over a decade ago. That was a really significant life event stressful, and my drinking didn't change. I was just still somewhat typical, no issues. There have been some things in my life with personal or with work I've experienced, and that didn't seem to shift anything. And so it was, for me, it was just a gradual realization that, okay, I'm not sure how I got here, but I'm here and I'm drinking every day and I'm spending a lot of time thinking about it and spending a lot of money doing it. And I'm not feeling good about it. And for a period of time, for at least a year, pretty sustained drinking, I wasn't willing to do anything about it. So there, it's all hindsight, right? I can look back now and recognize that I think, my mental health, I wasn't addressing that. I believe that depression came into play. And somehow as I began to sort of lose interest in some of the healthy behaviors and choices, sleep, nutrition, exercise, the things, hobbies and whatnot, as I sort of lost interest in some of those, drinking alcohol became this balm, this way to just sort of avoid the issues and just sort of be numb and get through it. But over time I had to face reality, or there were going to be serious consequences to my health, to relationships that are really important in my life, to my work, right? It could lead to losing my job. I was taking really making high risk choices with those really important things in my life.
That's very self-aware, the way you talk about it, that it became this gradual piece of you that you noticed was taking over parts of your life. Were there others who noticed it as well in your life?
I've heard this before, but as my alcohol use became more important to me, I wanted to protect it. And I recognized that there would be judgment, that there would be concern, that there would just be genuine concern for my health and my choices from family or loved ones. And so I did a good job of hiding that, right? For example, I would walk around in the evening after work at home with a beer, and my partner would see me with a beer, and which isn't unusual, but I took measures to conceal the fact that was my fourth beer, right? So I would do these little sneaky things just so I didn't have to have a conversation with somebody about that. And that was a sign that's a big red flag. Okay. Yeah, that's an obvious one for me. And I knew it, and I had shame about it. Shame is a big piece to this. When you know that you are making choices that could be dangerous, or just that could be, that aren't serving you. When you know that, and yet you're not willing to do anything about it, just creates a lot of shame. And that's aside from the stigma that we have about drinking and alcoholism in general. And I'm just talking about the personal side of my drinking. Now there's also a culture with being a law enforcement, federal law enforcement agent, right? There's a culture around, a very masculine kind of a warrior culture, where alcohol and being able to go out and have your drinks and be in control and do this thing, that's a thing too, right? To say, hey, I can't drink alcohol because I've got a problem with it. There's been a stigma. Well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you, control unfortunately it's still there, but I think the more we have honest conversations about that, hey, we're human, and I don't believe any of us are broken. We are whole adult human beings. We have challenges and struggles throughout our life. And at 49 years old, with now a year of sobriety, I've got a lot of compassion around and understanding that part of being human, and we have to have a lot of grace with ourselves and each other and support each other.
When you said it took you about a year, you were aware of the behaviors, you were aware that there was some shame with it. After that year, was there a point in which you said enough is enough, or how did that realization and that desire to change that relationship with alcohol come about?
Well, to paint the picture, that's a great question. To really paint the picture, what my use looked like for me was I began a ritual. So every day after work, I would stop at the convenience store and get a 6-pack of beer. Whether the fridge was full of beer or not, I would stop and get a 6-pack. And I was drinking these really strong IPAs that were really 2.5 beers, right, in this. And I would get home and I'd have a beer before I walked into the house. And then I would begin drinking essentially throughout the evening until my head hit the pillow, right? And what was happening is in the evenings when I would potentially have an opportunity to connect with my spouse and have some time in the evening for that relationship. By then I was influenced, affected enough I had enough alcohol in my system where I was just really fatigued, wasn't interested or able to really connect intimately, with conversation. I mean, physically or emotionally, I was just not available. And alcohol had a lot to do with preventing that connection. And so I'd go to sleep and often just pass out. And then I'd wake up feeling like crap. Could still, not a hangover per se, but I felt like crap. And I'd have some coffee and shake it off, and then I'd get through my day and generally productive. And however, at the end of the workday, just be on repeat with that process. And I also found that my use shifted on my days off. I began like on a Saturday or a Sunday on my days off, whereas before maybe I'd start drinking around dinner time, often in preparation for dinner. I found myself starting to drink earlier and earlier, right? Until it was like, oh, I'll sit down and have some lunch and I'll have a beer. And then after that beer at lunch, I'd have a few more till dinner time. And then I would continue, right? And that's sort of what it was looking like for me. And I was spending a lot of money every day, every week, every month. It was really adding up. And again, I was going through this kind of hiding my behavior, right? And so at some point, fortunately, I started addressing my mental health. I found a counselor found a therapist, a licensed mental health counselor, and started just doing some personal work. And through that process, I was able to kind of get more perspective and clarity on alcohol. Became a big player and detrimental to like kind of getting unstuck from, let's just call it depression. But so then I recognized, okay, I need to address this. And it was impacting my relationship, my romantic relationship. It was impacting my sense of self, my sense of self-worth and my self-confidence. I felt like, man, can I do this? Became kind of scary. Like, wow, how did I get here now? This is really important. Can I do this? Will I be, am I ready? So there was that. So what I did, I began engaging with Veterans Affairs. I was in the Army for 10 years. And for a long time, I didn't engage with all the resources that are available with Veterans Affairs. And so I reached out to Veterans Affairs and I was able to get an appointment with a substance misuse counselor. And I just started a conversation. And it was actually a relief to be able to just talk to somebody that it felt safe. There was trust. This was a professional, and being a professional, I respect, right? They've got the experience. So I'm going to talk to somebody that does this for a living. And so I said, hey, this is what's going on. What do you think? And yeah, it was a relief to start that conversation. I'd already been talking to myself about it. And so that began a series of weekly conversations. I did a couple of assessments to kind of see where I was, right, with my addiction, and actually naming it and saying my behavior is like I am modeling this addictive behavior with this substance, right? There's an issue. I have to do something about it. There are plenty of examples if you look around with people that haven't been able to manage it. So it took several weeks. It took maybe 3 months of counseling before one day going home from work, I decided that I wasn't going to stop at the convenience store. I wasn't going to get the 6-pack. I was going to go home and there would be beer in the fridge and wine or whiskey. And I was just going to take a pause, just going to have one evening, no alcohol. And I wasn't sure that I could do it. The assessment and the counseling revealed that I was at a moderate risk. I was sort of caught myself before a really strong physical dependency was present. There's definitely like an emotional dependency there. And I would argue that I already was probably physically, my body was already craving, like I was already there. But in my case, I was able to go home that evening and not have any alcohol. And I actually got a good night's sleep. I didn't pass out on my spouse. And I woke up feeling different, feeling a little better. And that was just the physical pieces. The emotional piece was, wow, I just did that. And it's sort of a big deal. And I think I'm going to do that again. I think I can, right? I was really unsure. And so the next day, no alcohol. And I got excited and I was like, all right, I better find an app and start doing like a tracker. Like I'm going to mark this day and then I'm just going to see what I can do. And I continued counseling, right? And I recognized like with a lot of support from like on the Veterans Affairs side, they've got an amazing a number of resources available. And also with work, with my agency, we've got a really strong peer support program and a resiliency program that is just growing, the needs there. And ironically, or serendipitously, or whatever you want to call it, with work at the same time, I was being asked to instruct resiliency classes. So in 2019, I became a resiliency instructor. This is a basic resiliency course. It's a 16-hour course, and it's like current form. And you spend an hour on a number of topics, like an hour on gratitude, number one, an hour on physical resiliency or spiritual resiliency, interpersonal problem solving, basic skills to just help you cope with your day-to-day, kind of those chronic stressors that come up, in your personal life, professional life. And so, I went into the instructing the resiliency thing, and I felt like a big fake, right? Like, what a hypocrite. Here I am with this issue with alcohol, and now I'm going to tell everyone about resiliency, right? And so really me just finding the inner strength to make a change on that one day, and how that one day has now led into a year and a couple weeks, and how on the personal side with some professional mental help and learning some skills to change. I did some cognitive behavioral therapy and some dialectical behavioral therapy on how to regulate emotions, how to just be aware of our self-talk or how we think and feel, and how that affects our behavior and our choices and so all of that was happening. And then I'd go to work and I'd have to talk about resiliency for 4 days a week. And then I began talking about it with my spouse and really being honest and saying, look, this is what I wasn't brave enough to tell you or to show you. This is where I was, and just found a lot of support there too. Like, people that know you and love you, they're there. They're there, and they're sort of just waiting, whether they realize it or not. They may not, like my spouse didn't realize that alcohol was a player. So that's sort of what was going on.
Shout out to our basic resilience training and for Jeff Shartner bringing that awesome course to our CBP.
It's become part of my, the thing with the resiliency thing. And again, we're talking about culture and law enforcement culture. Nobody really wants to be told how you should think or how you should feel or what you should be doing. That word should, right? Don't should on yourself. There's a lot of judgment in that word. And fortunately, with my lived experience and, the failures and the wins, right? The failures seem like capital F's and the wins seem like little W's, but I'm able to now talk about resiliency in a really authentic way. And I hope make it relatable. And I share my story. Alcohol isn't the only story, but it helps me keep it real. And I think it's appreciated. It's not scripted and it's not a PowerPoint. So that's what was happening.
That's pretty great. It's real difficult when that's your day job to feel like you're not doing it authentically. And to be able to get up there one day and be able to say, I truly believe this, I live this, it really can impact your overall beliefs about yourself and the world around you. And that's not to say that that's everybody's experience. I happen to share that experience with you as well. It was hard to be a negative person when you're teaching resilience skills. When you're in therapy and you're doing CBT and cognitive behavioral therapy and going to the VA, were you ever concerned at any point that your realization about where you were with your alcohol use and you being a law enforcement agent, did you ever think that would be a problem for you?
So absolutely concerned. that I was headed down that road where alcohol would impact my status with work, my job. And I wasn't as concerned asking for help or having an honest conversation with my immediate supervisor and saying, and I did this. I did this recently, and saying, look, I need to take, well, at the time I needed to take 2 weeks to do a veterans retreat. It was a mental health retreat, and I needed to use some sick leave and I needed to use some personal leave. And I felt very comfortable saying, look, I'm struggling and I need to do this. I need some time off to take care of myself. And when you have the support and you have the trust, the confidence that they've got your back, or at least one of your supervisors that you can go to, that's a great feeling, right? I had that. Not everyone has that. And hopefully the stigma and the culture, we're moving in the right direction. But yes, concerned, and then absolutely willing to say, hey guys, I'm not okay. And this is what I need to do.
What do you think the biggest challenge to your recovery has been?
The biggest challenge to my experience post alcohol, like abstaining, essentially, I don't necessarily consider where I am now as in recovery per se. I haven't gone through engaged with Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay. I hit my 1 year sobriety mark on my little app on my smartphone and sent a few texts and kind of patted myself on the back. But, I didn't get there are some little symbolic things that some of these recovery programs do to celebrate that, right? That's not what I'm doing. And also when people say, oh, you're on the wagon, it's like, no, I'm not it's not, sobriety isn't a wagon you get on, like you're going to get off sometime. Being in recovery absolutely applies to me. I don't use that language. I really wake up and make a choice every day. And guess what? I didn't take all the alcohol out of the house. I'm around alcohol in the cupboard, not beer in the fridge anymore. My spouse doesn't really drink beer at all. But for me, the biggest challenge, I think, is just to not really to sustain the motivation. Sometimes that's a concern, like what will keep you motivated? What do you have in place, like a safety net to catch yourself, right? To avoid, slipping. And because you inevitably, right, people can absolutely fall out of sobriety, right? So for me, the biggest challenge is just sort of developing, okay, long term. For me, I don't believe moderation is something I want to try to experiment with. I have a solid year under my belt of sobriety, and it's a freaking superpower. I love it. I have reclaimed a sense of empowerment that's incredible. And there's no judgment for any of my friends or anybody that drinks. It's just a choice I make for me. And I'd love to have conversations with people that are thinking about kind of recognizing where I was. But the challenge is, okay, well, last year sobriety was for me. This year's sobriety is in honor of my father, who became an alcoholic later in life. So it's in my DNA. His parents were alcoholics and later in life as well. And AA saved their lives and their marriage. They were in recovery for the rest of their life. My father's been unable to do that. So just knowing that and recognizing I love my dad, but I absolutely don't want to become my dad. He's 80 years old and I don't know how he's still managing, but he is. So for me, it's like, okay, well, what are my goals? The challenge for me is just kind of, I guess, setting you can tell I'm not quite there yet, right? I don't have a solid, it's in the works. It's under development, but I do have the truth and the knowledge. Like, I no longer need or want to use alcohol just because, like, I don't really need, but the challenge, I guess, is shaping the concept around, okay, well, I guess this is just life now. I don't know. I'm still wrapping my head around, right? Because alcohol it just permeates our culture and our everyday. And so just recognizing, like, okay, I probably drink too much coffee now, but tea, a nice, like, hot cup of tea in the evening, or, like if I'm having dinner, just having something besides water, right? I joke and say that sobriety is boring, and it kind of is in a way. It's a joke, right? But, you know, and I don't really mean that. It's a joke. But here's the thing with sobriety for me. It removed that filter that I needed to have to just sort of be numb and avoidant and not really be honest with, not really deal with my stuff. And once you take that away, and that can be scary, you take it away, and now you have to just get really comfortable sitting with yourself and your truth and the good parts and the bad parts. And it forces you, sobriety just forces you to be more honest. And once you get past that uncomfortable part, being with yourself and being honest, it gives you a clarity and a perspective that's really empowering. Sobriety isn't boring, and there are a lot of fun things you can do besides drinking and getting a buzz and whatnot. But you have to be ready to just get real. It's worth it. You're worth it. And just take one day at a time and find those people that know you and are there for you. And I've found so many people have, through the choice of sobriety, now suddenly, like, my community has grown and I feel more supported and seen than I ever have. So thank you, alcohol. But not to make light. I mean, this is life and death choices, that it can get to that point. For many people, they can have a really healthy, moderate, sustainable relationship with alcohol. And for some of us, it gets weird.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add? You already answered the last one with what would you say to somebody who is trying to decide if they're ready to seek help? I feel like you kind of had, but if you have anything else in that regard.
I don't have any advice. I am learning as I go, but I would just like, again, the intent with sharing is just to let people know that if you're listening to this, I'm going to make a couple of assumptions, right? That you're either reconsidering or taking a look at your substance use, misuse. It could be alcohol, it could be something else, right? That you're starting to think about it and you're getting curious, which is amazing. And I encourage that, right? Or you're a loved one of family or a loved one of someone that you're concerned about and maybe you don't know what to do. I would just say, be patient and be gentle with yourself, right? Check your judgment and stay curious. And just know that there are a lot of people out there that are also struggling, and it can be done. You can do it. There should be a message of hope in all of this. So that's all I've got.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Living in Recovery. If you or someone you know needs help, reach out to the Employee Assistance Program. To reach a licensed professional counselor at 1-800-755-7002. For additional resources related to the Substance and Alcohol Misuse Prevention Program, please visit the CBP Workforce Care Directorate page on CBP.net. You can also send questions directly to CBP Resiliency at cbp.dhs.gov.